today here at the Hybrid Identity Protection Conference.
We live in a period of great change. That's probably an understatement. And I think I will just observe what I think the strategic trends of those changes are. Has the why of digital infrastructure changed? Has the what, what it's made of, has that changed? And the circumstances of our responsibilities changed. I think it's that third box where we had the most interesting. So
You're going to refer to the Five Eyes report that came out recently?
I can refer to that. I think I will make some references to the study that Semperis has done, which I think is illuminating about the nature of what's real in this space, what threats have occurred, at what regularity. But the more interesting thing is the choices that people are making about those threats. So, for example, in the Semperis report, it says that, not surprising to me, 72% of attacks on enterprises typically occur on holidays and weekends. Not because that's the moment when criminals have some free time, but because they know that we might not be on our guard on those moments in time. And the majority of organizations reduce their manning at that point in time. That's a conscious choice. It might not be something that is top of mind, but it's a conscious choice to withdraw some of our strength at the very moment that we should actually have it on the rise. And so I think that those choices actually determine our future. I'm going to use a joke in the session that I'll give away at the moment. I'm going to start by saying, kind of imagine a hypothetical conversation between the CEO and the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, where the CEO says, so how are we doing in this thing called cyber, which he can't even pronounce. And the CISO, being a little bit intimidated that moment in time, says, and we're good. Right? And the CEO now kind of emboldened says, how about 2 words? 2 words, not good. Right? And I say that for many people, the difference between a good future and a not good future is fate. It just happens. I fundamentally disagree. It's based on choice. The choices we make about how we actually read the tea leaves and respond to those tea leaves, which is more a doctrinal issue than it is a technology or an expertise issue, is I think going to determine the future. So I'm going to speak to them. I think technologies like Semperis can be enormously helpful, but you have to make sure you understand what you want them for and to deploy them correctly. You have to make sure that you've allowed for having addressed the threats that you know about and being able to surge into those that you cannot account for at this moment in time. It's a hard lot to do in 30 minutes, so we'll see what we do.
Yeah, there was an interesting bit in one of the talks I saw this morning about how, I think it was the Microsoft guy said you don't want to give your team an impossible task. You want to give them things that are possible, because there's no point in expending energy on something that's not going to happen.
I agree with that. I also think that we shouldn't assume that what we have is fixed resources, meaning a limited kind of pot. Organizations that actually have an augmentation strategy, they know what they would do when they go from peace and tranquility to emergency to crisis. They know how they would augment their resources, not by simply turning up their own rheostat, but by calling on prearranged resources, whether that's technology or legal assistance or technology assistance. They tend to prosper in those times. They actually have the wherewithal to actually navigate those difficult circumstances. Organizations that think, no, it's a fixed sum game, and we're going to go to the dance with what we kind of arrived at the dance with, they wind up being challenged because an adversary that says, I'm going to come into your space and I'm going to know your space better than you do.
Right.
And I'll be able to surge more resources into that space when you can't, they prevail.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I went to a red team, blue team exercise, tabletop exercise earlier today. And the red team has such an advantage. It's so easy to just, if you're attacking a company, just go onto the LinkedIn page, find out who reports to who does what, and just find those people on social media, figure out their passwords, just everything. It's so
they get to determine the time and place of the initiative. They get to seize the threat. And so if you're an organization that finds yourself in that unfortunate, deficient place where you don't know when the attack is going to come and at what surface, you need to actually prepare it such that you have more resources that they can't overmanage, that you're part of a larger team, whether that's the technology you bring to bear, or that's the augmentation of resources, intellectual resources that you can bring to bear. But you actually challenge the adversary, maybe not directly, intimidate. You don't want to invoke that, but challenge the adversary to say, look, you got to beat all of us to beat one of us. And if you want to beat us, you're going to have to beat my team. And I'm on a bigger, better team. And the premise is that we know our architecture better than you ever will. And so if you get inside of it, which is not unusual, if you get inside of it, we will still know it better. We'll be more agile, we'll be more audacious in the defense of that architecture than you possibly could be in setting the table for the next attack, or perhaps seizing the high ground of the initiative the next time around. Organizations that do that actually deploy expertise, muscle memory, and coalitions, they don't so much kind of prevent those disasters. They will still occur, that they can respond and recover from them better than anybody else.
More quickly. And you kind of, here's a question. I mean, if attacks happen frequently on weekends and in evenings, why do companies respond by beefing up their staff?
Well, that's a really good question. It's probably attributable to some cognitive dissonance. But we think that because we're taking the moment, we're perhaps kind of taking a break, that everyone's going to play by the same rules, and that criminals or rogue nation states, they're fair-minded. They won't challenge us at a moment when we're at our weakest point. But just the opposite is true. And so if we actually think our way through and say, how would we approach this? That the defenders have an attacker's mindset, then they're more likely to increase the resources or at least level set those resources at those moments in time. I think that's what the study calls into to mind.
Right.
When you read the study, you kind of have to think about the other perspective. And what is the attacker thinking? If you're actually going to reduce your resources at a certain moment in time, then I'll wait and attack you then. Right? And so why would we then give them that opportunity? Why would we allow them to have an advantage on us? We need to have a level set across that span of time. And maybe you need fewer people because part of what you're doing is kind of user services and there are fewer users. That makes sense. But if you have a SOC for purposes of defending your architecture, and that architecture is living 365, 24/7, then you need to make sure that you're on the front balls of your feet across the entire time. I think that's what the study points out. That we've actually entered into some cognitive dissonance, that we've actually made choices without thinking our way through the second and third order consequence of those choices based on our schedule, based upon our kind of battle rhythms. We haven't thought about vote that's cast by the opposition, the aggressors. They get a
flood right there.
think about that, take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, I mean, for example, companies might bring in a MSP or MSSP on the weekends and evenings. I saw something in the report about how some companies in some countries might have to, by law, pay overtime during off hours. Because you don't want to bring into your environment.
Yeah, most companies that actually have a level set in terms of their time and attention given to security actually follow the same strategy.
Yeah.
It's like it might be overtime for you, it might be a weekend for you, but it might well be in the middle of a working day for somebody else.
Yeah.
How do you have a partnership with them such that when you kind of take the moment off, they're actually surging into the middle of their day? That's a pretty solid strategy where you actually kind of have a level set of time and attention because you spread it across some geographically distributed and diffused landscape. That was going. I'm a creature of the U.S. national security community, and it's kind of like the old British Empire, the enterprise where the sun never sets. The sun is overhead, somebody is in the middle of their working day all the time. Then how do you take advantage of that?
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
It's 5 o'clock, it's noon somewhere.
Yeah, it's always noon somewhere.
Be the better mantra.
So what do you see as sort of like kind of in the national security space? What does the future look like, especially in terms of protecting, Active Directory and Enter ID?
Yeah, several things. One, what's not going to change is that our various businesses or government departments' missions will still be existentially dependent upon digital infrastructure.
Right.
Identity will still be at the core of that dependence. We'll still need to make sure that identity, which is the core of the realm in terms of what gets to exercise what privilege inside these systems, we need to defend that. That may well be in the next administration within the United States that there's a de-emphasis of regulation that would have otherwise created more resilient, more robust systems across the supply chain, which I think is going to increase the pressure on operators, understanding that the pressure is not off on them to defend that reliance on digital infrastructure. The threat posed by criminals in rogue nation states is probably level or up. And therefore the responsibility is all the greater on the operators who essentially live in that space. So that the core of identity are things like Active Directory. We need to make sure that we rethink, have we really given enough time and attention to that? Have we defended that such that our very business lives depend on it? Because they do. And I think that will be something that's constant or increasing.
I try to, believe in like less regulation, but I'm finding that more enterprises seem to be upping their game, and more companies in general, as a response to regulation. And I've come to reluctantly embrace a theory that perhaps more regulation in the cybersecurity space might be a good idea.
Hey, look, I'm in the same kind of philosophical place you are, which is I probably color myself a libertarian, kind of somebody that says, let's allow individual citizens or companies to exercise the full kind of play of their initiative. That being said, if there are things in our world that are not discretionary, safety being one of them, then we shouldn't let that be discretionary. Right? For 50 years, the internet has been largely ruled by innovation and market efficiencies. Safety has always been that third kind of core attribute that we've said, we'll come back, pick that up, bring it along. But we don't, because the innovation or market efficiency continues to surge ahead. I think it cannot be discretionary that things upon which our lives, our safety, our business viability depends, are discretionarily investing in safety. We need to mandate that. We should do it with the lightest possible touch. We should do so with the advice and counsel of those that we regulate. We regulate the tailpipe of our car and pursue automobile safety. And we need to harmonize it such that we don't have kind of 15 ways of imposing cost on these businesses. But if we do that, we'll then achieve a reasonably kind of reasonable equilibrium like we have, say, in the automobile transportation sector, which is where there's an expectation that automobile manufacturers will build in safety kind of in the form of seatbelts and lug brakes. And that the people who build the roads will similarly build in features that make those roads navigable in a safe manner. And that there's some governance, not just in the artifacts, but in the actual use of those, where we'll monitor, make sure we pull off drunk drivers or people who speed or text while they drive, so that every party in the system has some responsibility, some contribution to the whole. It will not be hierarchical, such that there's a single boss that with a megaphone is directing the efforts of all those individuals. You can choose a time and place when you want to get up and drive a car from place A to place B. But the system's set up such that you can safely navigate from place A to place B because it's built in. I think we need to get to the same place in digital infrastructure, cyber systems, and regulation. Therefore, it has to be something that we commit to take upon ourselves. Lightest possible touch, no linger.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a very good analogy, but the only thing that worries me is it took decades to get to this, where the airline industry.
And quite a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And even then, the airline industry is probably a better example because I think that the physical hazards have been sufficiently reduced that it's very rare to have an airline accident. It's almost now always attributable to an error in operations as opposed to the technology underneath. With automobiles in the United States, I still think the death rates across the United States are in the tens of thousands, maybe 35, 40,000. So it still can be a risky endeavor. It took years to get it down right to that. Imagine if we had not done that, it would be an egregious cost. It's already an unacceptable cost. I think in cyberspace, what we have now is that there are all sorts of small kind of failures, sometimes large failures. Think about what happened a month and a half ago with CrowdStrike and Microsoft that we accept because we don't understand how they add up. We haven't thought about the aggregation of those. And for those that are waiting for a cyber Pearl Harbor or a cyber 9/11 to say that's when we get serious, it's actually happening. It's just diffused in time and space. We haven't seen it for what it is. It hasn't had that single cathartic effect on us as we're all watching the television at the same time. Because we're distracted, right? And what happens well to the left of us or well to the right of us, we don't kind of take upon ourselves as that could have been me. So that is happening.
Sort of a slow motion crash.
It's a slow motion. It's diffused in time and space that we haven't seen it for what it is. If we could actually concentrate it, speed it up, and then see it for what it is, I think that we would be a lot more serious about understanding our reliance on digital infrastructure, taking the necessary steps to invest time, energy in the technology, the expertise, and the assignment of roles and responsibilities in that. And to the point that is going to be at the center of much of this conference, the Active Directory where identities are kind of forged and kind of validated. That is a particularly sweet spot for an attacker. It should be a particularly important part for defending.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you very much.